How's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to wrap up our localized data policies with some basic QoS. I say basic only because of the fact that some of the more advanced QoS policies that I've tried to create and make happen, for some reason, they're just not working the way that the way that I've been shown they're supposed to work. So I'm not going to give up on them, but what I am going to do is I don't want to slow my progress down. I can always circle back and add the videos in later. But for right now, because of the fact that I am studying for a certification and because I am trying to get through this video series, I don't want to let a problem with that affect my forward progress. So for those of you that are also studying for a certification and you're getting hung up on a particular thing, don't let that slow your progress down. Go through it, understand what it's trying to do, right? Because at the end of the day, most of the certification exams today or more, do you understand how XYZ works? And if you were to look at this, do you understand what it's trying to tell you? If you can check those boxes, then you know you're in good shape. Whether or not you can actually demonstrate it or proof of concept it, do a YouTube video on it, is really not the win at the end of the day. So the things that I have not been able to get to work, I am putting a note next to them saying, okay, I understand what's happening, I understand the goal of the particular feature or capability, but for whatever reason on the lab that I have built, it is not working. I will circle back and try it later. Maybe I need to spend more time on it or whatever. But, so yeah, don't let that type of stuff slow you down. So with that being said, we're going to take a look at a couple of different features and capabilities in terms of some basic policing and some basic shaping. So the idea is we're not going to do anything heavy duty. We're not going to go and create a localized data policy with scheduling or classification or any of those advanced features. We're going to simply create a couple of policing capabilities which will give you immediate results and things like that, because I don't know whether or not the actual virtual machines that we're running with here will actually support the data plane classification, and then we'll actually apply the tail dropping or the bandwidth reservations that I put into play. So I'm not going to dive into that stuff right now. We'll take a look at that. So for example, if you're looking at the title of the video, I always put a number so that you know when to do them incrementally, 001, 002, 003, etc. So when you get down this far, if you see a missing video, it's not that I haven't created it, right? It's just I'm leaving a space for a video to get inserted at a later point in time. So, and because of the fact that we're going to be circling back, taking a look at this, I will look at the centralized data policy for doing things at the vManage to vSmart and push it down to do global policing. That'll be coming in the centralized videos, which will be actually the beginning of the next set of policies we take a look at, because that's when we really get into the meat and taters of how SD-WAN actually works. And that's my really bad attempt at a southern accent. So with that being said, I'm going to go and walk you guys through a couple of different variations as to what we're trying to accomplish here. The main goal is to police. Now, what does policing actually do? Well, for those of you that have ever had the I'm 100% pro law enforcement, pro first responder. So if you've ever been pulled over by a cop, right, or you've been driving down, going too fast along a road, and a cop pulls you over, they're policing you, right? They're pulling you over and say, "Hey, Rob, you're going a little bit too fast. His posted speed limit is 55. I had you going 70. You're going too quickly." Sometimes they're cool and they give you a warning. Other times, you know what? If you were legit not doing something you were supposed to be doing and you got a ticket, well, then you know what? The only person you have to blame is, well, you, because you were behind the wheel. It was the space between your ears was the determining factor as to why you were going the fastest as you were going. So yes, I have gotten a speeding ticket before. You learned your lesson, you move forward. But policing is the same idea. Whenever a particular traffic type exceeds a particular posted speed limit or bandwidth reservation or bandwidth capability, guess what? The device has the ability of slowing that traffic down. Policing will drop traffic, where shaping will slow it down. So when would you use shaping, and why would you use shaping? Well, the reason why you would use shaping is, let's look at it from the perspective of actual internet connectivity and actual MPLS connectivity. So in the real world, not every device or every circuit you're going to get terminated on your equipment is going to be one for one to your interface speed. So if you have gigabit interface speeds, right, you may not be getting gigabit internet. You might only get 100 meg. But if your interface is able to send at gigabit, but you are only signing up for 100 meg, that means you've got 900 other megs that you can play with that aren't actually going to get used. So the provider is going to be like, slow you down. They're probably not going to do that a lot. I mean, I have some pretty fast internet here at home, and I can pretty consistently download well above my upper threshold limit that they tell me that I pay for. But you know, at the end of the day, I might get an extra 30, or no, not 30%, another 15% above my actual posted speed, which is, I'm okay with that, but that might be their upper threshold. I might hit that, and that's what the provider's upper limit is out of the gate. So that's their burst capability, right? So for example, if you're paying for 100 meg internet and they let you burst above that a certain percentage, let's say 5%. So if it's 100 meg, take 5% of 100 meg, that's going to be what? 5 megabits, right? So you might actually be able to download it at 105 megabits per second, right? And as long as there's no contention on the interface at the time, you might get all 105 megabits per second. But if there's contention and other particular customers are trying to also download at full line rate, well, guess what? You might get slowed down a little bit. The idea is, if you are in a situation where you're not paying for gigabit internet or gigabit MPLS circuit connectivity, but your interface that you're connecting to is capable of sending and receiving that quickly, you're going to want to slow them down. And we'll talk about how that comes into play as we're going forward. So shaping is always going to take effect outbound. So it's an outbound application, and you can't do anything to modify that. Policing is going to be an inbound or an outbound configuration option for you, and we'll take a look at exactly how that comes into play when we get to the policing aspect of it. I'm going to show you how to do it via the CLI in a couple different ways. It's really simple. There's a few ways to do it, and we're going to walk through those steps on VEdge1, and then we're going to switch over to VEdge5 to do this demonstration, simply for the fact that it makes sense to do it on VEdge5 because, well, VEdge5 connects to an MPLS provider, right? So we might only be getting 5 megabit connectivity from our MPLS service provider. But Rob, this is 2020. Wouldn't we get gigabit? No, you might not. There's a lot of providers I know that if you want a gigabit internet connectivity, you're going to be paying out the wazoo to get gigabit internet or gigabit MPLS service. So a lot of times you're using your SLA enabled capability, so MPLS. You might only be getting 15, 20 megs. You might get 50 megs, but oftentimes you're not going to get full line rate. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at actually how this works and get this party started. Okay, so the very first thing that we're going to play with is going to be the policer. And the policer capability, when we go to set this up, we're going to police inbound on gig 0/3 here on VEdge1. So the traffic that comes in from iOS 5 or iOS 6 that goes out to the internet will be policed. Specifically speaking, if we look at the show IP route VPN1, we're going to see that we have a NAT entry in the routing table, which means we are going to use connectivity out to the internet. So if we go to router 5 and I ping 1.2.3.4 and I come up here and I do a repeat of 100 and a size of 1500 and I send that ping, right, we're completely uninhibited pings, right? Everything works out of the gate. But if I go over to VEdge1 and I go to global config and I go underneath the policy capability, and underneath here I have the policer option, so I'm going to choose policer, and I need to go ahead and give it a name. So I already have one created, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose one that's a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and say I'll grab this name real quick. I'll delete it just to show you how that would work. Pretty simple stuff. Let me go ahead and commit that real quick. And then I'm going to come in here, policer, and then give it a name. It's going to say police underscore 8 kilobits per second. Oops, supposed to be 8 kilobits per second. And then underneath here, I'm going to say that the rate which I'm going to allow the traffic to leave at is the minimum, which is going to be 8,000 kilobits per second, right? So that's 8K. The exceed, if something does happen, what happens to it? Well, it's going to be dropped. Not drip, drop. I'm going to drip it out. Now, I do have the exceed option. If I wanted to set the exceed, I could say, you know what happens if you exceed it? I'm going to drop this one as well. If we do a show config, we can see that. Now, we do have the burst option, which right now I don't have configured. If I type in burst, I could say, okay, what are you going to allow for bursting? I'm going to say, well, in this case here, I'm not actually going to allow bursting. Okay, so I'm going to just leave that as itself. I'm going to commit that config. And, oh, burst is not configured. Okay, so I have no choice. Burst. We'll say 15,000 because that's the minimum that we can use. If we type in burst, 15 is the lowest we can use. I'm going to do a show config, and then I'm going to go ahead and commit. There we go. So you have to do it. So now the next thing I have to go do is I have to go underneath the interface that I want to apply this to. I'm going to type in VPN1 interface GE0/3, and I'm going to basically tell it right here. I get to specify the policer here, call the name of the policer, 8 kilobits per second, and then I need to specify the direction I'm going to apply the policer in. If I set it to be inbound, it's going to be looking for any traffic coming in on gigabit 0/3 in order to slow that traffic down. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a quick show config. There's the command. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply that config. Okay, now it's been applied. If I go back to iOS 5, and if I come over here and do a show interface detail for GE0/3, and I do a pipe and include RX dash policer dash drops. Go ahead and, so I'm already dropping traffic. So let's go ahead and come back over here to router 5, hit the up arrow, and you're going to start seeing the traffic is going to get blocked. So what's happening is by sending a 1500 byte ping instead of the normal 100 byte one right here, by sending a 1500, that increases my bits per second rate. So that's what allows me to demonstrate this like this. So I'm going to go ahead and Control-Shift-6 to stop it. Now if I was to just do this and do a repeat of say 100, it's really not going to have any effect, at least not for initially. But if you put a much larger size, you're basically increasing your data payload, which basically makes it easier to see that the policing is working the way that it's effective. That's if you assign the policer to the interface. That's option 1. Let's take a look at option 2 for policer, which is where we create an ACL and then we associate the policer to the ACL. Let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick. So that variation is pretty interesting as well. It takes a little bit of configuration because we have to create an access list and a bunch of other stuff. So let's go ahead and on VH3, VH1, I'm gonna, if I come up here and do the output, we can see that the policer is taking effect and it's blocking traffic. So now I'm gonna go back to global config. I'm going to go to VPN1. I'm gonna type in interface GE0/3, and I'm gonna type in no policer 8K in. I'm going to remove that, right? I'm going to go ahead and commit that config. I am going to exit out a couple times, and then I'm going to go to policy. And underneath here, I've already got the policer created, right? I need to create an access list. So access list, and I'm going to call this ICMP underscore ACL. And underneath here, I'm going to give it sequence 1. I'm going to match on, underneath here, I'm going to match on protocol 1, which is ICMP. The action, I'm going to specify here, the action will be accept, but I'm also going to come underneath here, I'm going to say the policer will be policer 8 kilobits per second. I'm also going to specify a counter. The count I'm going to just call it the ICMP counter. Okay, now that I have that in play, if I do a quick show config, there's my syntax, right? So I'm going to exit out one more time. I'm going to type in the default action. Oh, I have to go out one more time. Default action will be to be accept. Let me go ahead and exit out one more level, do a show config so we can see the entire configuration. So I'm saying policy, I'm going to go underneath here and create an access list called ICMP ACL. I'm creating the first sequence. It's going to match on protocol 1 or ICMP, so I'm doing a protocol-based match. Basically no different than me saying permit ICMP from any source to any destination. But then I want you to go ahead and associate a counter to it and then also police it down to 8 kilobits per second. But it allow the initial 15,000 bit burst that goes along with that. Any other traffic is just going to be pushed forward. We're not going to have to worry about anything. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to exit out of that. And then I have to go to VPN1 interface, and I'm going to VPN1 interface GE0/3, and I'm going to specify that access list, and I'm going to call ICMP ACL, and I'm going to apply that inbound, right? Because I want to slow this down for traffic coming inbound on the inside interface. So let's go ahead and just do a quick show config on that as well, so we can see that syntax. So there we have that. So I'm going to exit out a couple levels and do a show config. So this is the entire preview of the config. We have our policy that creates the ACL with the attributes that we've defined, and then we've applied the ACL inbound on the inside interface. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to commit that config. And then I'm going to go over here to iOS 5. And remember this one before? I'm going to go ahead and hit that again, right? So we're going to hold not a whole lot of anything, right? But if we increase our size to be 1500 and hit the enter, then we get that. It's a little bit of a different output, right? So, and if we go back to iOS or VPN1 and we do the, let's go to this guy right here, we can see we're dropping more packets, right? So that's the point, right? We're able to validate that the policer is working the way that it's defined and all that good stuff. The last one I want to show you real quick is going to be the shaper. Now, again, the shaper is going to control your output to the provider. So this is going to be a connection. I'm going to do this on vEdge 5 because the only connection it has is to the provider. And I'm going to slow this down to be 8 kilobits per second. The shaper, I'll do 10 kilobits or whatever the minimum is. I actually haven't validated that config. But let's go over to, since vEdge 5 is and I'll do the policer there as well. So I'll police inbound at the same rate, and I'll set the shaper to it. So whatever I'll make the policer's rate match the shaper's rate, so that whatever the rate, the committed rate, so the allowed rate, will match the shaper's rate, so that those two will coincide, so we won't have any problems with ineffective drops and things like that. We won't be dropping traffic for the sake of just dropping traffic to show that the data is working. Okay, so from vManage, we're going to log in here real quick. And of course I get this pesky little, I should refresh it every time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the Policies tab. And the way that this works is you have to do a couple things. So when you come over here to Policies, I'm going to look at Localize Policy, and you have to create an ACL that's going to match on the traffic. So we'll do a couple of simple policers, right? Since I come over here, I have the list. I'm going to create a policer. I'm not going to create an ACL-based policer. So if I come in here, I have the ICMP policer already created, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that policer and I'm going to associate the ICMP policer to the interface level. So I'm going to come over here to templates. I'm going to go on the MPLS device. I'm going to edit this. And then on the feature template, I'm going to scoot this over and organize them to be MPLS only on the GE0/1 interface right here, which is my only interface outbound. I'm going to edit this. And this is heading towards the provider. So underneath here, I'm going to have the shaper, right? I'm going to come in here. I'm going to put this in global, and then it doesn't really give you a specific value. So if you were to, like, for example, come over here on the CLI and go to VPN 0 interface GE0/1 and then do the shaping rate, right? It doesn't tell you the value to put in here. There's no minimum, but you can put whatever value you need. So I'm going to go ahead and put in here 8,000, which is what the policer is set to. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to update that. And I'm going to click on next. We're going to look at a quick config diff so you can see the before and the after. Give that a couple seconds to pull up. Look at the config diff. If we look down here, we'll see that the shaping rate is 8,000. I'm going to go ahead and configure devices, and I'm going to push that to, give that a couple seconds to, there we go. And I'm going to pause while this is being pushed. Alright, so I was able to push those details down. So we should now have a shaper. If we look at VH5, and let me go ahead and log in real quick. We're going to go to admin and then admin. As you can see, I was doing some testing. If we look at the show run VPN 0 interface GE 0/1, we should now have a shaper set at 8,000 bits per second. Now if we go to router 14 here behind iOS 5 or VH5, and I do a show IP route, right, we have a bunch of OSPF routes in here. So I'm going to go ahead and ping 1.2.3.4, and after it goes out and comes online, but if I do a repeat of that, repeat 100, right, it goes out all day long. It's a happy camper. Even if I put a size value on that to be 1500, it's still going to send it. Now you can see the shaper comes into play and slows it down because it's sending way too much data, right? So the shaper does eventually kick in. Now if we come over here and we look at the on VH5, there's really no data that helps us understand what's going on. So if we were to do a show interface detail for GE 0/1 and we look through this, we're eventually going to find the shaper, right? The shaper's right here. It's shaping down to 8,000 bits. But when we look at the output, right, when we're going to see how many packets were received, drops, no drops, transmit drops, nothing. So it is working, but there's really no way for you to understand whether or not why it's being dropped, other than the fact that the policer is kicking into play and it's only allowing 8 kilobits per second. So in order to maybe potentially test this a little bit more, let's go in and on here, we're going to go back to our templates on MPLS only. I'm going to edit, or I'm sorry, not on this one, on the feature. We're going to find MPLS only. We're going to come down to GE 0/2 on here, which is the inbound interface. I'm going to come over, going to adjust this guy and edit it. And what I'm going to do is on the ACL QoS for the policer, the ingress policer, I'm going to come over here to global and turn this on. And unfortunately, there's no way to really push this. So I need to, in order for this to work, I can't just associate an ACL that doesn't exist. So if we come over here and do a show run policy, you're going to see that there is a policer here. So fortunately for me, I'd already sent it. I did this ahead of time. So, and I'll show you how I had to do that. But what I'll do is I will associate this policer here, and you can ignore this telnet name or the access list name. It's just a name. So in this case here, I'm calling the ICMP policer from the ACL. So I'll apply the ACL of telnet ACL. It's just a name. It absolutely has nothing to do with ICMP itself. So I'll apply this ACL. You know what, let me show you how to fix that, because if any good instructor would fix things like that. So in order to fix those details, we come over here to policies. Let me go ahead and jump out of the way. Go to Localize Policy. We have the telnet ACL policy, right? I'm going to come over here to custom options and then access control lists. And what I'm going to do instead of the ACL policy, I'll come in here and edit it. and I'll come in, and this is matching on this guy. And if we expand this out just a little bit, you'll see the ICMP policer. Let me call this the ICMP ACL. I'm going to copy and paste that right here and save ACL policy and activate it. And that's going to be a local policy, and then it's going to push that down. So I'm going to click on next. I'm going to look at the configuration diff to make sure that it's going to line up. Give that a couple seconds to do its thing. So we look at the config diff. It's just changing the name from Telnet ACL to ICMP ACL. The sequence 1, all that stuff is the same, right? The configuration that we typed in on VPN1 is the same logic. You know, sequence 1. Actually, you know what? Let me go create this from scratch. Okay, let's do it that way. So we're going to come over here to policies, localize policy, and so what we want to do is take a look at how to actually create the policer and associate that to the interface and template and all that type of stuff, because now we actually have to push that down to the vEdge in order for the vEdge to learn it. So what I'm going to go do is underneath here I'm going to go down to policies, and I need to create a policy in order for this to work. So I already have something going in the works. This is something that I'm testing out right now that I won't be showing you. But if I want to add a policy, I can go in here and create the policy. And the nice thing about the wizard is it is a step-by-step walkthrough. So the policer is already created. If I click right here, and you'll see that I have ICMP policer, where we can see the exceed is dropped, the rate is 8,000 bits per second, the burst is 15,000, and so on and so forth. So if I was to come in here and edit this, you know, you would just populate these fields. You name it, and then, you know, the values that you want to associate to it. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. I'm going to click on next. Now I'm not going to associate this to a QoS model or anything like that right now, because these are things that I'm not too interested in setting up at the moment. I'm not going to associate this to an access list either, because I'm not trying to associate it to an ACL to match on something. I'm trying to just give it a policy. So I'm going to click to the policy overview where we get to this point, and in here I'm just going to type in the ICMP underscore policy and copy and paste that into here and click on save policy. Something very, very simple. Give that a couple seconds to policy is empty. Let's create a now that we have the policer created, and we're just going to be leveraging the same policer that something else is leveraging, we have to go to the access list, and underneath the access list we actually can go ahead now and create the ACL, because you have to associate the you can't just associate a list to a policy. You have to call either a QoS policy, a route policy, or an ACL. So I'm going to go ahead and simply come in here and say an IPv4 ACL, and I'm just going to type in here the ICMP underscore ACL, copy and paste that in over here. I'm going to add a sequence rule, and then in the match, I'm not going to specify anything in the match, right? Because in this way here, it's a match anything. And the actions, I'm going to accept it, but I'm going to put in here a policer. I'm going to call the policer of ICMP policer. I'm also going to throw in a counter. I'm going to just call this the ICMP counter. Something simple like that. Save, match, and continue, and save ACL policy. Now I'm going to click on next to policy overview, and it's the ICMP policy. I'm going to go and click preview. We can see that we've created the, I've actually got to go back to there and set the default action to be accept. So I'm going to click back to the ACL policy, come in, click on it, and go to edit, and then on default action, adjust this guy real quick to be accept, save, match, and continue, save ACL policy, next, and then preview one more time, make sure everything looks good, which it does, save policy. Okay, now that I've created the policy, now I need to push the policy down to the vEdge. So I'm going to come down here to templates. I'm going to choose the MPLS only device template. I'm going to say edit. And then I go down to additional templates, and right now I don't have any policies pushed. I'm going to come down here to the ICMP policy, and I'm going to select update. And what that will do is that will push that policy down to the vEdge. So it's going to take a couple seconds for that to work, and I will pause until that's done. Alright, so if we do a show run policy here, we should see the policy show up, which we do, which is what we want to see. Now I have to take this access list, ICMP ACL, and I have to apply it to the port. So in this case here, I'm going to come back over here to templates. I'm going to go to feature templates. I'm going to squeeze this over, organize them by name, and I'm going to grab the VPN1 G0/2 template. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to edit this guy, come down to ACL QoS, and then for the ingress ACL, I'm going to change this to be global, turn it on, and then I'm going to paste in the ACL's name. I'm going to click on update, click on next, and look at the config diff real quick. So in the config diff, we're going to come down here to this guy, and we'll see that ICMP ACL is applied inbound. So I'm going to go and click on configure devices, and it's going to push that config down to vEdge 5. And so after a few moments or so, we should get a push down to vEdge 5. That usually takes a couple of moments to push and get down there. If we were to do a show run interface, VPN1 interface GE0/2, now the ACL has been applied. If we come back over here, it's successfully applied, and then we're in good shape. So if we do a show run VPN0 interface GE0/1, we have the shaper. So the shaper and the ACL line up, right? Our bit rate is 8K for the policer. Our shape rate is 8K here. So what I'm going to do is come back over here to iOS 14, and I'm going to ping 1.2.3.4. Okay, the ping works that way. It's repeated 100 times. Everything looks good there. Nothing really to report back on. Now, if I increase the size to be 1500, we can see that it bugs out and doesn't work the way we want it to. Now, the shaper doesn't really give us any feedback, but if we look at the vEdge 5, we do a show interface detail for GE0/2 pipe include drop, we're going to get quite a few drops. But the one that I want to pay attention to right here is the policer drops, right? Because that means that it's working the way that it's expected to. If I come back over here to this guy, let's say I put in 500, right? So it takes longer for the policer to kick in. And if we look back at vEdge 5 and hit the up arrow, we're going to see 435 drops, so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, it is working the way that we want it to. We just have to take into consideration those details. So just remember, if you're creating a localized data policy for anything that's going to affect data going through the device, so data plane traffic, you can create it in the same manner you would a centralized policy. The only difference is you have to actually push the config from vManage down to the vEdge, and then you have to associate it somehow, whether it's an ACL or to an interface or whatever the case might be, to a BGP peering for a route policy. Those things do matter. So with that being said, that's basically what this video was intended to show you, with some basic policing and stuff like that. I will be testing other capabilities, but for right now, that's all I'm doing for QoS. Until next time, guys, thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.